The room appears steady, offering no sign that anything has begun beyond what is already visible. Attention settles on the space without identifying a clear starting point. Details appear complete, as if the scene was already underway.
The configuration feels settled, not newly arranged.
Light progresses in a way that suggests continuity rather than initiation.
Nothing in the room indicates that this is the first moment.
Object and reflection align as if this alignment has been in place for some time.
Visual relationships appear established rather than forming.
The scene feels mid-sequence instead of at a beginning. There is no clear signal that anything has just started. The tension arrives as though catching up to an ongoing state. The configuration feels already in progress.
The present appears to have continuity behind it.
Nothing announces itself as a starting cue. The room feels slightly ahead of awareness. Observation seems to join an existing flow rather than initiate it.
The space suggests duration without revealing its origin.
Consistency implies that something preceded this frame. The absence of novelty suggests an earlier phase.
Everything appears mid-process rather than newly formed.
The present carries the quiet implication of a missing beginning.
Observation feels slightly late to its own subject.
The room behaves as if it has been here longer than awareness.
No visual cue clearly marks the beginning.
The scene feels ongoing, as if you arrived after it had already started. The room remains steady, yet one directional cue no longer aligns with quiet expectation.
Light appears to settle in a position that does not clearly correspond to its source.
Cause and effect remain visible, though their connection feels slightly delayed.
Orientation shifts register only after they have already been accepted.
Shadow structure begins following a logic that does not fully agree with itself. Light begins favoring a direction the window does not sufficiently explain.
Reflections begin referencing positions that feel subtly reassigned.
Distance stops functioning as a reliable guide. Surface responses duplicate without a clear initiating cause.
Directional certainty weakens while the environment remains calm.
Light organizes itself into patterns that feel unrequested.
Object posture begins implying adjustment without visible movement.
Depth cues quietly exchange their
their expected roles.
Expected gradients reverse without urgency. Expected gradients reverse without urgency.
Correspondence between form and result begins loosening.
Single inputs begin producing more than one visual outcome. Spatial logic bends slightly without collapsing. Orientation shifts begin feeling selective rather than shared. Separation between object and surface begins quietly eroding.
Light begins referencing the object instead of its source. Distance stops predicting clarity in expected ways.
Hierarchies of visual attention quietly dissolve. Their alignment inconsistencies accumulate without escalation.
Causal direction becomes quietly ambiguous. The room continues functioning while becoming harder to intuit.
The room responds as though its reactions arrive slightly after they should. Visual effects continue after their apparent causes conclude. The room begins holding more than one moment at once.
Conflicting time cues coexist without resolving. Cause and effect stop agreeing on when events occur.
Expectation begins arriving before observation confirms it.
Visual information begins repeating instead of refreshing. Visual information begins repeating instead of refreshing. The moment feels present without feeling current.
The room carries visual memory alongside perception.
More than one moment appears to occupy the same visual space.
Effects no longer conclude when their causes end. Recognition begins arriving after perception.
Time indicators quietly disagree. The present begins feeling slightly retrospective. Object and environment stop feeling simultaneous.
Change begins feeling buffered rather than immediate. The scene gives the impression of having already occurred. Temporal reference points slide without direction.
Visual memory overlaps with current input.
The scene feels slightly behind itself. Completion no longer follows change immediately.
The present stretches without advancing.
The room behaves like a memory still forming.
The scene appears to wait for itself.
Time no longer occupies a single position within the room. The room presents itself as complete, without clarifying whether this is the beginning or a continuation. Visual order settles into a condition that does not require a starting point. Elements align into relationships that feel already established.
Balance returns without signaling a reset.
Light resumes behavior that no longer invites interpretation. Visual complexity reduces without implying a conclusion. The environment settles into a readable state. Orientation holds without encouraging reinterpretation.
Cause and effect appear reconnected without comment.
Spatial logic resumes without drawing focus.
Continuity replaces variation.
The room no longer implies progression.
Nothing within the frame suggests alteration. The scene feels sufficient without asserting finality.
Stability persists without indicating duration. The present loses distinction from other moments. Temporal markers lose relevance when repetition feels exact.
Recognition replaces inquiry.
Nothing appears unresolved.
The environment offers completion without declaring a start.
No clear boundary separates before from after.
The scene feels complete in a way that implies recurrence.
Observation no longer produces discovery.
The room appears ready to be experienced again, as if it never clearly began.